All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much for joining in on our podcast here. Again, in this podcast, what we're doing is we're focusing on aviation stories, what got individuals into aviation, why they bought an aircraft, their ownership experience, lessons from the cockpit, and then what they're doing in the community right now. It takes a certain level of success to be able to own an airplane, so there's a lot of great lessons to be learned. And what better today? We've got Carl Valeri, who has two really awesome podcasts that I have been listening to for years, and he's given me the opportunity to be on, and now I've got the opportunity to have him on my podcast. So, Carl, thank you so much for being here.
Well, this is just awesome being here, James. I'm so excited to talk about my story and talk about aviation. Who doesn't want to talk about aviation, right?
That's right. That's right. And that's where I'm going to start, really. In this podcast, I just think it's cool to hear this story. I had been doing this for years as a mechanic, just sit in the seat next to these pilots when they would fly, my customers, and especially as I flew as well. You're in the cockpit with them for like 3 hours or 2 hours, and they're completely captive. You can't, no cell phone. Back then, we didn't have Starlink in the plane, right? So no cell phones, and nobody really had XM radio or anything like that. And I just asked them their story, and it's really cool. It's something that's dear to me. I really enjoy it, and I hope the community, the aviation community in general, learns from it. And from there, that's where I'll start, Carl. Like, what got you into aviation? Everybody has that moment where they got hooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always tell people it started with a bit of a kind of a stumble. And the reason I say that is somebody I didn't like got me into aviation. That's a bit different, but I still love aviation. And actually, to go back, when I was a little kid, I grew up near a small airport, and it's called Somerset Hills Airport. It's not there anymore. There's one called Somerset Airport not far away, and it's really was a beautiful area. I'd sit there, a little kid with my hands in the fence watching the airplanes take off and land, and they closed that down. But that airport got me into making model airplanes. Never thought I'd ever fly. Had no even intention to do that because I have glasses, so I can't fly, right? Well, that's what I thought at least. So fast forward, I went to college, and I was in computers. I started a computer business, and my dad's like, "Hey, why don't we send you to college and pay for a degree in computer science?" I was like, "Terrific." And then during my last semester in college, I actually had placed out of most of my exams, and I became studious in college. I wasn't very good in high school, but in college I did. And while I'm sitting here in one of my labs, my computer labs, told someone I had this interest in these simulators because I went computers and I was really into model airplanes. And I just started getting into model airplanes, the radio controlled, because that was my next step. And the person next to me, who was kind of bugging me, says to me, you can actually fly those things. And I'm like, no, come on, you can't fly those. Me? I'm a computer guy. I have glasses. There's no way. He says, no. He says, I tell you what, go down to the airport. They have this thing. It's called this introductory flight thing, and you just go in and you tell them you want to go fly. So I went to Wilkes-Barre, Wyoming Valley Airport. I went to school in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I walked in, and I was a little daunting at first. I was somewhat of an introvert, and I was like, wow, this is a very foreign world with this fence, and you walk in, and the things look different, and there's posters on the wall of airplanes. I said, hey, I want to go fly. And I'll never forget, this is what really got me into flying. When I was up there in the airplane on my introductory flight, I look at the flight instructor. I was like, wow, this is so cool. I've always wanted to be a bird. And then he looks at me and says, yeah, and I get paid for doing this. And the light bulb went on. I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And just to add to that story, that was on May 1st, 1989. And at the end of the month, it was like May 30th, I soloed. And just absolutely have loved it ever since. And the other hard part of this whole situation was that I went to my parents after I graduated. I said, hey, I think I want to fly airplanes for a living. And they're like, wait a minute. We just paid for this education in computers. You got to do computers at least. So what I decided to do, and that's what motivated me, is I said, hey, I'm going to work really hard and start my business and make enough money so I can pay for all my ratings. And that's what I did. And then fast forward, I've went to become an airline pilot, and I've owned a few airplanes, which we'll talk about, and partnerships, etc. And I've absolutely loved the journey. It's had its ups and downs, literally and figuratively speaking, but it really was something that I became so passionate about. And the one thing that I still love is that same day when I discovered I love flying was just looking out the window at these amazing sights, watching the leaves turn colors, watching a sunset over the Atlantic Ocean, watching a sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean, watching a sunset on the West Coast, being on the East Coast at one time and the West Coast the next time. It's just so cool. And here's what's really neat. Like you just said, the people you get involved with in aviation are just absolutely amazing. Usually they're very successful in whatever they do. It takes a little bit of success to be able to afford an airplane. And as a matter of fact, I was just looking at a partnership in an airplane this morning, and it was just so neat hearing the story of that person and how they got into aviation. So I'm so excited to hear all the different stories that you have on your podcast too, of other people. It's kind of interesting hearing, how do people actually really get into flying? I think this is absolutely terrific.
Yeah, so graduated college, started flying. That's when you got your license. And then I assume there's this great big long break.
Yes.
And at what, where you were running and growing businesses, and then all of a sudden you woke up one morning and you wanted to be a professional pilot, or was that the goal the whole time?
I think the goal was to make money flying, because I've always had a business. I didn't really understand how that was going to pan out. I thought the airline pilot thing was really cool. I was working at a flight school. I decided to go work at a flight school just to discover what the business was like, part-time as a dispatcher, and absolutely loved that and the people that came in there. But then I was like, how do I do this? And in 1989, I got my license. It wasn't until 1999, 10 years later, that I went into it full-time as a pilot. A couple things happened along the way. I've been through those things, divorce, got married, went to a different country, got divorced, came back, started flying again. So there was a lot of ups and downs there, but the one thing that stuck is I absolutely loved flying. And this was key in my life, and it's still key now. Why did I really want to go fly and get paid to fly? If I get paid to fly, I can fly as much as I want. And that was the real key, is that if I got paid to fly, I could take this thing that was my hobby and turn it into my career. Now, sometimes it's a bit dangerous because things change. That hobby of flying is still there, but it's in the general aviation world. My job as a pilot, that's not my hobby, right? That's you look at it a little bit different. I enjoy it. I love it. And I love the challenges. But the hobby part of that job is the overnights. Because when you're working, remember, all those people in the back are relying on you. You can't just have fun. The fun part is the people. It's the things you see. It's not the things you do with the airplane. You fly the plane the way that the company wants you to fly it. But when you're outside in general aviation, I get to fly the plane the way I want to fly it. And what was the coolest thing is, after having a business and paying for all my ratings, I went out and went into a club, flying club. And I went to the airport, and there's like 4 airplanes or 3 airplanes that time. And I could just go up in the air and fly around. It was amazing. It was like so much freedom to be able to get in an airplane and just say, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to go down to the Jersey Shore. I was up in New Jersey at the time. Or while I was in Florida, I'd go and see my aunt. I have to say, one of my favorite things, and I know people are going to think this is so silly, but one of my favorite things to do in aviation, I live in Lakeland. My aunt lives down in Okeechobee. It only takes me like 40 minutes maybe to get there in an airplane, but I can go down there and see my aunt, have breakfast or lunch, and be back the same day. So I got to see my aunt, which would take me 2.5 hours to drive there. it's 45 minutes. And I was like, wow, this is like a magic carpet. It gets me from point A to point B. And that's when the utility of the plane started really, clicking in my head. And then I started realizing, because I never really used it for business, but I see how people do that they're able to go around and be able to do all these really cool things, like go to a job site, et cetera. And I've flown people for business, and that always fascinates me. So whatever angle of aviation it is, I really love it. And and even the simulators. When I was in college, I said I got into simulators, and now I'm actually a simulator instructor on an A320 and 321. So that's kind of what happened there. But that fast forward, there was a lot of personal things that happened there. Another cool thing that happened is I used to hate when people would say this to me, but now if I say it, everybody's going to make fun of me, but they would say that I was kind of like a hippie at the airport, and the reason they said that is there was something I always wanted to do, and that was to own a motorhome and go camping. And my friend at the time said to me, "Hey, why don't you go ahead and buy that motorhome and become a flight instructor, and you can become that person you want to be?" And I was like, "Hey, that's a great idea." I actually couldn't tell my family. As a matter of fact, my mom was kind of embarrassed. Here's this guy, living in a motorhome. And what's really funny is now it's cool. The van life thing is so cool. So I actually was going to do an episode on one of my shows, what it's like to have, what's van life like as a flight instructor. I actually lived full-time in my motorhome while I was flight instructing. And people used to think it was really cool. I thought it was just normal. But it was a blast. So that actually kind of introduced me to the fact that you can do whatever you want. And there's so many experiences that you can have in aviation. There's so many that I still haven't had. And that's what excites me to this day about aviation. But there's two sections in my life. There's the professional side, and then there's the hobby flying, which, I think sometimes there's a little overlap. But for the most part, those are kind of like two different things. Now the career in aviation enables me to pay for and buy airplanes and that kind of stuff. So that actually paid off years later, of course.
Yeah, whether you're doing it professionally or not, you're still getting to fly airplanes. It's awesome.
Absolutely. No, the other thing I learned, and I just want to relate this, the one other key moment in my life as a pilot is I went to this airport, and I think it was in Andover. It may have been in New Jersey, and somebody landed in a 152, and he landed on the grass strip, and he saw me looking over the fence, and he taught me an amazing lesson. He said, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm doing great. I just looking at your airplane. I think it's really cool." He says, "You know what?" He says, "I had 3 other partners in this airplane." He said, "All those guys went out and bought bigger airplanes. And you know who's still flying? Me. I bought everybody else out on this little airplane." And his point was this, that it doesn't matter the size of the plane. What's most important is that it gets you in the air. And if you fly an airplane that's unaffordable, you may someday not be able to fly anymore. And I was just like, holy cow, that was such a great lesson. So there's so many amazing turning points in your aviation journey, whether it's as a career or as a hobbyist, that you don't realize are going to happen until they happen. So my point is always keep your mind open, and you never know where those nuggets of wonderful wisdom will come about. And my life has changed since I've been in aviation, because I've learned so much. And the other cool thing about aviation is it brings us all together. We're all from all these amazing backgrounds. But you have somebody who's a CEO sitting next to somebody who's an electrician, next to somebody who's an engineer, and it just goes on. I mean, there's all these different people with this common interest, and it's really the neat thing about it too is it's very cerebral, and it's not something you can take lightly, and there's a commitment, and most of us do it because of that fact. It enables us to really relax.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of really good things that I wanted to highlight for a second, and it's a common trend every time I talk to somebody about their aviation journey. Number one, a lot of people bring up the community. Now, obviously, there's bad eggs everywhere, but that's not the aviation community that I know. I know one of the early stories I remember is going to an air show with my dad. Took me to an air show when I was really young, and we didn't know anybody, and there was a little old elderly couple with a 182 that they had flown in, and I was like a 6-year-old kid, and I was just in awe looking inside their cockpit. They had the doors open, they're standing there. She's like, "Hey, hop up in here." Yeah, she didn't know me. She had no, they had ropes around the airplane. There's no reason for her to do that, but that's the community that I know. Another piece is kind of like what we saw with our bro Gabe Mueller, and then certainly with you as well, that you saw the community on the East Coast just pretty much drop everything and go help hurricane victims. So
absolutely,
a huge shout out to the aviation community, and then another thing is most of my customers they're starting in their aviation journey probably in their 50s. They're kind of at a point where they've either built a business that now they have the financial resources to do something like this. Then they start, okay, how can I buy back my time? And it seems so daunting because somebody like me, I started flying before I could drive, before I had my learner's permit. And then when I got my private, I had literally nothing to do and the money to do it. I was a busboy and I just saved everything, right? And then joined the military, and I used my bonus to pay for my license. I was completely not distracted. And then when I went to Air Force pilot training, I was completely not distracted there too, right? Like it's just go. But it has to be so much different with yourself and my customers too. And it would, somebody out there right now that's listening to this is probably someone is thinking about taking the plunge and buying an airplane. It probably seems so daunting to they're a husband, they're a father, they're a business owner. How could they possibly get their private pilot's license and then work on their instrument? But it's actually a lot more common than you'd think. And and that's kind of where your story, you started a little bit, or you finished up a little bit later, right?
Absolutely. And for instance, my first partnership really in an airplane was in my 30s, and it was during a period where I was working for an airline and wanted to get back into general aviation. But I said to myself the same thing: it's kind of daunting, and I want to understand aircraft ownership. And I said, hey, wait a minute, why don't I join a club? And you know what? Those people are so open and willing to help you understand all about flying. And one thing I found is that for me, it was important that I had that community, because I really don't like flying by myself. Very on occasion, maybe if I'm flying upside down or something. But if I just don't want to be there by myself. I want to share it with other people, and the club made that happen. But then it slowly, gradually got me into understanding what really happens when something breaks. What really happens, an aircraft goes down for an extended period of time. And that's where it slowly got me into finally having a plane by myself, which was a little scary, but it really wasn't that bad. I think the jump getting into it was tough. So if you're looking at actually purchasing one, I find that the best thing to do is take your budget, see how much you can afford, and double the time, double the expenses like I do in my business. So what that means is if you can afford a $100,000 airplane, maybe buy a $50,000 airplane. So you'll never have to worry about fixing it, and you'll never have to worry about it going down for a while. You can always go out and rent another airplane. But if you stretch your budget, that was the biggest thing. It's all about money management in life. If you stretch your budget, one little hiccup can stop you from flying. And that's really unfortunate. And that's where the guy that I saw that landed at that grass field said to me, hey, I still have this airplane. I go in the air. The air doesn't know what kind of plane I'm flying, right? I get to see the world through these eyes, the same as somebody who's in a 747. It's just a different altitude, but it's the same attitude. It's really just enjoying that. But that's something I think that is great about so many organizations out there, is that you have things like AOPA. Even if you're a mechanic, and that's something else, I hang out with mechanics and just ask them questions and learn from them which airplanes are the ones that cost the most to maintain. That was something else I learned too, because I wanted to get a twin at one point, and then realize it's not twice the expenses. It's actually 2.5 times the expenses usually for a twin, and it can be 3 times depending on the size of the twin. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. There's 2 engines. But I didn't realize there was all other things involved with other systems within the airplane, that type of thing. But to get to that point, the great thing about the internet now, this is something that I've actually got really turned on to lately, to be honest with you, is YouTube. So what do I watch in aviation on YouTube? I watch people talk about airplanes. So I actually watch aircraft salespeople. That's one of my favorite things to do. If I want to learn an area I want to live in, I watch real estate agents, because real estate agents give you all the information. If I want to learn about a specific model of airplane, I watch someone who's selling an airplane. I can't tell you how many 210 videos, I think I mentioned it was a 210 that I was looking at, how many 210 videos I've been watching lately. And realized after watching all these videos, I'm like, oh my God, I really don't know much about this airplane. You know how you think you know about a certain airplane, and then there's all these different variants. And a big shout out to some of these people that put stuff out on the internet. It's just absolutely phenomenal. And I think it's because, and I know it's because they want to sell the airplane, but they're doing a greater service by giving us history on the models and how the gear doors work. As you know, you've seen 210s before. They have different gear. I'm just talking about one model. There's so many other models out there. Like when I had the 1964 Cherokee, there were so many different variants of that. And I think that's what's so darn exciting about YouTube and about podcasts and things like this, is you introduce people to aviation and realize, hey, if I had reticence to do that, you might have reticence, but remember there's another community that's out there that's going to help you, and just talk to people about owning their airplane. I think that's super important. Is, hey, how do you like your airplane? Tell me a little bit about it. I'm thinking of buying one. And boy, does that conversation go on for weeks sometimes.
Yeah, it's just that's why I really enjoy doing this. I mean, this is literally what I do all day anyways. I mean, I talk to customers. I own an aircraft maintenance shop, right? So people are calling me, asking me all kinds of different questions about airplanes, what they should buy or what I know. And this is just a cool way where I can take a lot of those conversations and share them a little bit further. But, you really touched on something too, because somebody out there that is looking to purchase an airplane, they got to learn how to fly, number one,
Yeah.
and then they got to buy this airplane. And there's as far as I know, I mean, there's a lot of resources that you can find from AOPA and a lot of the groups, but for the most part, the percentage of the population that are pilots is like 1%, and then I don't know the number of those pilots that own airplanes. Do you have any idea? It's probably even low.
Yeah.
You're maybe half of that.
Yeah. Least.
Maybe.
Yeah,
and so it's not like you can just kind of bump into your neighbor and ask him questions about purchasing an aircraft. And so much of it is completely different than any other thing. It's not like buying a boat. It's not like buying a car. The insurance is completely different. How you pay the sales tax on it is completely different. No one's really going to tell you that. Not including the local government that's collecting the sales tax on it, right? So unless you're diving in trying to absorb this, or you bump into somebody that's in the community, you can either get really bad information, or you're not educated enough, and so you may jump into a plane that you have no clue that it's going to cost you $60,000 or $100,000 a year to maintain. Like you purchased it. This is a funny thing it's not funny, honestly, but I'll run into a customer and they got a great deal on a plane that they paid $120,000 for. Let's call it like a Cessna 310 or even some of the really rundown 414s. And they're just like, they have no clue that it's going to cost them, that the annual, they're probably not going to leave the annual without like 20 or 30K out the door, just to get it back going. And they're not realizing that. And so that's another reason I think it's really good that somebody would go out, find, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about purchasing an aircraft, go down to your local airport, bump into the CFIs, bump into the mechanic, get it, go to AOPA, join AOPA. If you're interested in Sirius, Copa is a great group. They've got a lot of resources. And now, there's more and more podcasts. I mean, there for a while, Carl, you were the only podcast, I'm pretty sure, out there. And so, and now we're growing
tons.
to maybe, I don't think there's that many, honestly. I mean,
not tons have started, I should say. You're right. There's not a lot of people that have stuck with it.
Not compared to, let's say, real estate or
right.
or business or any general other podcast. There's just limited knowledge.
I think a part of it is because it's hard to make money doing it, and the real estate agent's making money, but the person that's in aviation really isn't. So they kind of get, discouraged as they keep doing it. But you have to realize it's going to be a hobby if it's general aviation, unless you're in that general aviation business, that type of thing, and maybe you're promoting a product or service. But I think people realize that if you're going to do this, you have to do it for so long. I mean, we have 700 episodes out there. And that's a lot of different episodes between the two podcasts, and that's a lot of work. So that's why I think part of the reason you don't see so much. But going back to what you said about the community and getting out there and talking to people, I think that's incredibly important. And just asking them, things like, where did you get this? Like a gasculator, was it Mike's? I think it's called. I had no idea what that was until someone said to me, "Hey, why don't you look at this?" For your gasculator that's leaking. I was like, oh, well, okay. And I bought it. And those kind of things where do you find that stuff? It's on stuff like this, on podcasts and that kind of thing. But I think it's terrific. I think like what you're doing, I think is absolutely terrific. And I think that, trying to share as much as we can with people is great. But there are, going back to what you were saying, I think this is also another really important thing. I know I'm kind of weird, but I've joined like all the type clubs out there. I'm in the Piper, the Cessna. I'm not in the Beechcraft. I'll probably join that one too. But I'm also in COPA, Cirrus Owners and Pilots Association. I join all these organizations just to learn more about those airplanes. And boy, in those forums, can you learn a lot. So to me, in my brain, that's me going to the airport and hanging out in the hangar at the airport. Instead, I'm hanging out in a forum. The one caution, and I always say this, is some forums can devolve into, say, political types of discussions. So that's the reason I like to go to type clubs where other people are paying. And a lot of times you don't see that as much. And they're very open, and there's lots of different opinions, but you resonate with somebody. Like, for instance, say you're comparing two airplanes. Well, you go to one forum, and say it's a 182 and a Cirrus. So you go to the Cessna forum and see what people say. And then you go to the Cirrus forums, and you'll be surprised at how honest people are about it, and they'll say, this is why I decided on the Cessna 182, or this is why I decided on the Cirrus SR22. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just right or wrong answer for you. That's really what it is. But you learn. I tell you, every single day I learned so much. And that's where teaching other people about airplanes, remember, you don't have to be a flight instructor to teach. You just need to a flight instructor sign their logbook, but you can learn so much from so many experienced pilots out there. And I've got a few hours, and I learned so much from the person that has maybe a few thousand hours, that has a lot of that time in a certain airplane, and they're just this, just whole resource of knowledge. Like, I didn't even know what a 195 or 196. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a 196, and I learned about it because my friend owned one. And that's the type of thing that is so exciting about the aviation community, and that's something that I would encourage anybody to get out there and look at. But as far as learning, talk to that person and say, hey, what is it about your 196 that you like? I'm thinking of buying one, and find those type groups and get out there. And I think you can find one for just about anything, either on the internet. Some have glossier magazines because they have more expensive planes, etc., and some don't. I do want to circle back to one thing you said about the ownership. It's not just the purchase price, because I can afford to buy a King Air that's sitting out there, right? It's $150,000. So James would know that if I bought this $150,000, King Air, it's not going to cost me that, is it? It's going to cost a lot more. And I have a friend that did that. And it cost him more than, I'm not going to say how much, I don't want to embarrass the guy, but it was more than $150,000 to fix it. He had more than $300,000 into this airplane, and it still wasn't flying. So that was a lesson he could have learned if he hung out with people in the aviation community. Here's a guy who was in real estate and got into airplanes. So to learn, hang out with aviation people like James and listen to podcasts like James.
Yeah, he could. And then, well, you said it took 300 to fix it. It could also, then the
more.
subsequent years, it's going to take 150 to 200 to continue to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a great idea. So not all that glitters is gold. And to understand the true cost of an item, you do learn that from other people in aviation. And someone said, the cost of something in a car, you can double it and put it in a boat, and double the same thing and put it in an airplane as far as cost-wise. So with the GPS in a car, double it, and when you put it in the boat, and double it again. So $100 GPS in that car is going to cost you $200 in an airplane, or in a boat, and then $400 in an airplane. It really is true. I mean, things are just so much more expensive. And that's something else, is just learning the fact that technology hasn't really caught up to the 20th century in certain areas. That's always amazed me with electronic ignition. I mean, that's just something that, and we've talked about that before, but even that just kind of blows my mind. It's starting to get better, but even still, it's just so far behind.
Yeah, and this is something you're touching on. I want to touch on it quickly because I want to also get into what you're doing nowadays, which is really exciting. But mindset also as you enter this field. Again, for the most part, most people that I encounter that are new to aviation, they're very cautious. They're consuming every YouTube video, every podcast, and they're ultra conservative, which is good. This is a completely new field that you know nothing about. However, there are people, as you're entering this new field, especially if you've been the best anesthesiologist, the best doctor, you worked for 25 years, and now you're at the top of your field and you're extremely successful. Shouldn't have to say it. I'm not saying it in a way to be kind of like flippant about it, or you should know this, but honestly, you can go into it with the mindset from I'm really good at whatever I do elsewhere, and have a mindset that's not of caution, because safety, this is your life, your family's lives. You have to slow down, take the time, learn this. For the most part, everyone that owns an airplane, well, not everyone, but a lot of people that own an airplane, they've had to have some sort of level of I don't take no for an answer. I'm gonna push through this, and those are actually, most of those are definable human factors by the FAA.
Absolutely,
those are behaviors and mindsets that actually get people killed. And so, and that's just one thing I'd like to really encourage you. If you're looking into this, if you're already listening to a podcast, you're probably already ahead than most people. But just slow down when somebody tells you something. Most of all the rules are written in blood. The manuals are written in blood. ADs are written in blood. And so, be cautious and try to. Now, it's a lot of fun and it's very rewarding. But take it slowly and try to embrace the culture, embrace, feedback that you get from the community.
You bring up that's such a great point. Even people that are confident in their flying, like airline pilots that go out into the general aviation world, they have to realize that this is a different type of flying, and you hear it all the time of airline pilots getting into a small plane and then balling up the airplane. That's something you don't want to do. So you have to realize what you don't know. Confidence is great. Cockiness is not, and confidence is terrific, and that's what you should have, and that to get to that point, whatever it is in your career. But going out there and realizing that you don't know something, and this is your opportunity to learn something. And with that said, when you go out there and you want to learn something and something new, be careful who you learn with, who your teacher is, because they can build you up or crush you. Me being in aviation for a long time, most of my instructors are ex-Vietnam, so I heard some interesting things from my instructors and some words I won't repeat. But I remember getting back into general aviation And I got to say this in a general audience here. And the thing the instructor said to me, this isn't exactly what he said, was, you're an airline pilot. I didn't think you would stink that bad at flying. I said, wow, you're not going to get many customers by doing that, buddy. I said, you remember the same thing happens the other way around. When I get somebody in the jet who's flying a little airplane, the same thing is going to come back to you sometime in life, is that every airplane's different and every airplane will humble you. And I'll never forget, taking a 777 captain into a Tomahawk. And he was like, gosh, I know nothing about this. And when I told him to bring the power to idle, he flipped. We're at 100 feet. He's fast. And I, to this day, try to remember that, because there's always the different environments we operate in. Like if you're a brain surgeon and you're a really good brain surgeon, I fly with some of those. You have a lot of confidence and you're really good at there. But then you come over to this other environment and it's something new and it's challenging. And that's the reason you're doing it. But remember, that's a different environment than over here where you're doing this incredible job as a brain surgeon. Now you're over here flying this airplane. And we just had this discussion today about, it's great to see a lot of those guys and gals, the airline pilots, say, hey, listen, I fly a jet. I haven't flown this thing. You teach me how to land it. And that's something that's really important. But what's even more important is who you share that with. Because you don't want to go to the FBO and go with an instructor, and that instructor say, hey, that guy over there, he really stunk. He was an airline pilot. Because, that person's not going to come back. And that airline pilot or whomever it may be may have the money to actually buy an airplane, and you just ran off a customer. We don't want to do that. We don't run off anybody in aviation, that's for sure. That's the reason they have all these rusty pilot programs. Rusty pilot programs for airline pilots. And that's where, when you get into the flight deck, you tell the person next to you, what happens here stays here. I do that in the simulator. Make all your mistakes. I'm not going to tell anybody what's happening in the simulator here. This is the big confessional. You can say whatever you want. You tell me what's the things that you're having a challenge with, and we're going to get through that together. That's the type of instructor you want, not somebody that's going to demean you. So sometimes that happens. So be careful. Don't let it discourage you either. Just find a new instructor. That's all.
Yeah, I think I'll disagree with you a little bit. There are certain people that don't need to be flying an airplane, and it's
absolutely
not necessarily their performance or any of that. It's the mindset that we're talking about. If you are not willing to listen and you think the rules don't apply to you, and that, get out of our industry. Get out of our industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You're making a bad name for everybody else.
I don't want people to get the impression I think everybody should fly, and I don't think that's true.
You can hang out at the airport now.
Yeah.
If you want to hang out and look at airplanes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But there are some people, because of the fact that they're dangerous to themselves and other people, just because of what you said. And also maybe it isn't for everybody. It's like, not everybody can do everything, right? But I think most people can learn how to fly. The type of plane might be different, maybe a small plane, et cetera, that's slow. But really, mindset is huge. It absolutely is. But you really have to realize that, when you go out there, this is new to you. This is a new environment, no matter what you've done in the past, whether it's flying or being a mechanic or whatever it may be. And that's really, really important. So hopefully I didn't get that impression that
no, not at all. No, and there's so many facets of where you can participate in aviation. I mean, some people, they don't have the financial resources to fly at all, and I know those people around the airport. Everyone does, right? They just love coming to the FBO and watching the airplanes take off, and they are contributing. They're in aviation. They're contributing to the community. So there's all kinds of facets. But okay. So I wanted changing gears a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the aviation community right now, you've got two really awesome podcasts, and talk to me a little bit about that. About each of them.
So the one that came first was Stuck Mike Avcast, and that's an aviation podcast for general aviation, and that's about learning to fly, living to fly, and loving to fly. It was actually started by Len Costa, and I was on episode number 2, and that podcast, because there weren't too many people out there doing this, was started by him, but also a gentleman, Rick Felty, who is doing the multiple camera in the cockpit videos back in 2011. in 2012. I mean, that was way ahead of everybody else. We used to call them Rick Felty videos, actually. And big shout out to him. He still does a lot of my editing. That podcast itself really grew. I mean, we were getting 30, 40,000 downloads per episode, and we were invited to go to air shows and things like that because we were all so passionate about aviation, and we wanted to pass on knowledge. And we would go over topics like how to do better landings, what are deep stalls, how to buy an airplane, what's the next event. We would do events and things like that. So what happened with that is it just morphed into going off into some other subjects and things like that. But we kind of got away from that path, and for a little while we decided to come back to it. It's just about learning, living, and loving to fly. And it's shown. I mean, people are like, hey, I really like hearing this. It used to be a really mixed crowd of people with different varying levels of aviation, and now it's mainly it's flight instructors that are doing that. So that's the stuck mic side of things. And then at the same time, I was a representative for the union as a furlough rep and for the Airline Pilots Association. And I was like looking for a podcast about aviation careers because there wasn't much out there. And that's when I said, hey, why don't I just start a podcast? How hard could this be? And that's the one that really turned into a business. That's the one where I have people working for me now. It's morphed into a couple things. Number one, during the podcast, someone said, hey, how do I get money to pay for flying? I was like, well, there's scholarships out there. Go find them. Well, there wasn't really a big scholarships directory out there. And, I told my mom, who used to help people with applications to college, I said, how can we do this? And she's like, yeah, go for it. Let's do it. And at the time, I think we only had like $40,000 or $60,000 of scholarships in the guide, the PDF downloadable file that we updated every month. And we finally got it to production. The problem is I halted it for a little while because my mom passed away. Right as we were going to actually produce it and publish it, she passed. And I remember her saying it was never good enough. It never, ever will be. And it never will be because scholarships are always changing. So now fast forward years later, almost 10 years later now, it's actually up to over $120 million in scholarships, and it's well over 1,400 pages in scholarships. Now we're the largest one out there, and we sell dozens of them in a day even. And it's really helping people, and we haven't changed the price really. It's $10 for a year access, and we update it every month. And I still hear that ringing in my ear, my mom saying to me, hey, this isn't, you got to do better. You got to do better. And it's that ghost out there that I'm chasing, is trying to make that scholarships guide as good as I can. But no one else is doing it because it's a passion project. There's some other directories that are out there, but nothing quite as complete as ours. And I have a lot. It's not me, by the way. It's a team now. I just find the scholarships and have someone else get them put in there. And then from there, people said, hey, is there any way you could help me get ready for an interview? Because as a furlough rep, that's what I was doing. I was helping people do interviews at these different airlines. I was like, sure. So I started doing coaching. And we went from one-on-one coaching to this group coaching recently, where we get together. It's like almost like a mastermind group. And so that's really what we're doing. We do the group coaching, we do the individual coaching and the scholarships guide. And of course the podcast is free, and that's our, giving back to the community. And then we have some other courses on resumes, and we're coming out with a pilot interview course because I have over 500 questions that I always ask people. So I'm putting that out in a video. So the big thing, that's it. I mean, that's really what we're doing. But the one thing that is so important about the Aviation Careers podcast is we're always very positive. There's so much negativity out there. And I as a matter of fact, lately it's been crazy because our podcast has really got more popular. There's not a day that goes by that someone doesn't say something bad about me or disagree with me or something on a topic. And it's really, and people say, wow, it's so hurtful, but I can't let it be hurtful. I have to come back with a response and say, hey, listen, I understand this has been tough for you. This may not be the career for you, but a lot of people are watching and listening. They're really excited about this. And if they want to keep going in their career, this is what they can do. They can get into the coaching. They can hear this positive message. But the most important thing is in aviation, both flying recreationally or in the careers, is that you constantly have to do something every day to keep moving forward in life in general. And I always tell people to take one step today to move forward in their career and their life. And I really believe that if you just do something like listen to this podcast and or learn something on the internet, and that's what's changed my life, and it's changed so many other people's lives. And I hear every day, for all those nasty comments I get on every single video and podcast I put out there, there's always somebody who says something nice and say, hey, listen, I just want you to know, don't listen to all that negativity. And I don't, it's, and that's changed my life. It really has. As long as I know someone has gotten something out of what I've done and I've been able to pay it forward, that makes my life whole, and that makes me feel like I've accomplished something in life. And that's why I do it. I mean, it's definitely not for the money or the fame, right? But it's a blast. I mean, there's nothing like it. I mean, there's nothing like aviation out there where you can actually share so much and change people's lives. And I think a part of it's because of the fact that you're flying in this medium. Going back to what you said, you don't have to fly. You can hang out with someone who flies. You can get out there into the airport, be involved. I have so many friends. That's why I love Sun and Fun. So many friends that don't fly but love airplanes, and they don't want to fly, and that's cool. They just love airplanes, and and I have other hobbies too. I'm into lighthouses, so I hang out with people that are into lighthouses, and that's something totally different. But it's neat that this brings us all together, and that's kind of the point there. But yeah, both podcasts have been fun. It's been a roller coaster ride in emotions, and people have come and gone, and it's been just a blessing to have such a community and realize that those people are out there and helping other people, kind of like what you're doing, James. And that's kind of the reason we wanted to have you on Stuck Mike Avcast and help us out there, is because the fact that you're really doing something for people and getting some information out there, even if we disagree.
That's right. Yeah, ideally you find a friend that has an airplane. That's actually the best path.
It is and it isn't. I mean, there are some instances where you can't find a person with a plane that can do the same things you're doing. I mean, I'm going through that right now. My decision.
Sometimes you don't get lucky. I get it.
No, you really don't. But hey, become a flight instructor. Everybody becomes your friend. It's like, hey, can you do my flight review?
Yeah, every now and again you'll. Somebody's got that friend. And he's like, yeah, I don't care. Just come around. But yeah, it's I'm really I really enjoy the aviation careers the most, honestly. Which Duck Mike, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm kind of like an aviation proselytizer. Like, I want as many people to join in as aviation as possible. Right. And so that's what you're doing. You're creating pathways for people to join in on the fun, really. And there's been so many times where people have limiting beliefs or ideas about aviation where, I heard that when I was a mechanic in the military, and they're like, oh, you want to be a pilot, you better have rich parents, and that's just not true. I didn't have rich parents. I did not. And, I still was able to do it. And then most of my customers, they obviously have a very high net worth now. I mean, most of them have built it in one generation, their lifetime. They built it. They were broke. They grew up poor and made it in one lifetime. And so anyone that thinks like, oh, that's never going to be a possibility for me. Here's another one that's really sad. I remember I was working as a mechanic in a shop, and this school brought a busload of kids through, and we looked over at them, and I was like, that's cool, they're coming through. And the mechanic was like, he's like, that's actually detrimental to them, because none of them will ever have the opportunity or the resources or finances to do anything like this. You're actually hurting them by doing this. I was just like, whoa, man.
Wow.
What a limiting belief right there.
Absolutely. James, it's interesting you said that, because on my show, Aviation Careers, we talk about all careers, engineers and people that fix airplanes. That has actually been a big push of mine lately, and I get some amazing pushback from people that tell me, don't tell people to become a mechanic. My neighbor's a mechanic, and we talked about that, and it's like, that is such a limiting belief that you can't make any money, and people are willing to tell you what to do with your life, but they're not going to be around for long. You're going to see them in a fleeting moment. do the thing that you want to do. If you want to be a mechanic, become a mechanic. I mean, I've always wanted to become an aircraft mechanic. I never did, but I got into this where I'm telling other people how to become a mechanic, and that's just as exciting. And that's something it is a limiting belief by a lot of people, that you can't make money as a mechanic. You can. You just have to figure out what's the best path for you. And with everything, there's compromise in life, right? I mean, there's different jobs and there's different things to do, and but no matter what it is you do, don't let people say no. I mean, my dad's a good example. I learned a lot from him. He came to this country with nothing, and he wound up becoming a physician. Didn't know the language, didn't know anything. Went to college. People said, "Hey, why are you going to college? There's a bus will run you over someday, so it won't be worth it." And he's never forget him saying one day he saw the guy telling him that and said, "Hey, listen, the bus never it ran me over." And he was a lieutenant commander in the Navy and as a surgeon, So that was kind of interesting there that happened. That's something I learned from him, coming from that immigrant status of not being able to know the language and having anything. But you can do it. You can do anything you want. We're all born similarly, right? We have different talents, but we can use those talents in many ways to get some outcomes that are truly, truly spectacular. And that I truly believe that. You just have to have faith in yourself and not be afraid, and manage everything in your life as conservatively as possible. But know you can do it. And if I can do it, you can do it. And we all started at the same spot with flight number 1, right? That's it. We all started with 1 hour.
Yeah, and this is exactly why I wanted to do this podcast. I mean, the stories of the people in the aviation community and what they were able to achieve with their backs against the wall and where they came from, it's truly inspiring. Especially, you learn also as obviously you and I are entrepreneurs, in certain regards, and we're continually working on our business. We're continually working on ourselves. And some of the people you'll run into the aviation community, they've been a business owner for 30, 40 years, and they've had all the hard lessons. They've been kicked in the where all the time. So they've worked on themselves. They've got better. And I remember, obviously, when you start in anything, you're not really good at it. And I was very, when I started this business, I was very quick to the jump. I was always anxious, and everything set me off. And I remember I was flying with a customer, and I watched him I was actually flying with him, and we were walking through the FBO. And the FBO totally messed up. Like, they didn't do anything that we needed. And he was in a huge rush. And I just watched him handle this situation with such grace. I learned so much from that moment. Just watch it. I mean, my face would have been red. I would have been so, paid off and blah, blah, blah. And I just learned so much from him in that moment, just handling things with grace and slowing down. And I was just going with him to fly that day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, it's interesting what you said. We all do have challenges in life. And, going back to that, and ask somebody, what was their toughest time in their aviation journey? And, I don't like to call myself homeless, but there was a time that I was sleeping in my car, and that was right after 9/11, and I was making $600 a month, and I was able to learn how to, and there's videos on this, how to park so no one thinks that you're in your car, and sleep in your car. So when you're there at the bottom of this valley, there is only one way to look, and that's up. You can choose to keep looking down, but all you're going to do is dig that hole deeper and deeper. But in anything, whether it's aviation or anything in life, try to turn around, look up, and realize there's a whole world out there. And all you have to do is stand up, dust off, clean yourself up, and move forward. And we all start with nothing in this world, and we all have different results. But it's an incredible journey, and it's worth it. It really is worth it because, the people you get to know, and sometimes those things that that really don't, hurt us physically or whatever, or sometimes they do. They really do define us and make us a better person. We learn so much from those tough times. And that's why, going back to the airplane thing, it really doesn't matter to me the plane that I'm in. People say, what's your favorite airplane? The one I'm flying. That's my favorite airplane, because you're looking out the window at the same world, whether it's in the jet or in the Cherokee. It's the same thing. It's the same world out there. And it's a wonderful perspective that we get to see out there. And I think everybody should try it. If you don't get your license, or if you're someone that wants to say they got their license, but you don't even want to fly, and I've had clients like that, go for it. You always have your pilot's license. Always, right? It doesn't ever expire. So you can always say you're a private pilot, even if you don't fly, right? But
unless they take it away.
Yeah. Well, that hopefully doesn't happen to you.
Hopefully
it does happen. Yeah, it does. And by the way, that's another thing that I do in my career coaching and in my services. I help people that have lost all their licenses to get them all back again, so you can go back to flying again.
And we could do a whole podcast on that.
Just on. Oh my gosh, absolutely, absolutely. But James, I love what you're doing on this. I think it's great to hear people's stories, especially people who have owned airplanes and have access to airplanes. And I think it does change you when you have a plane, and it does make you hopefully humbler, and it makes you learn a lot from the other partners. I think if you get a partner, you learn so much from those people. I've gotten so much business just from my partners. It's been terrific.
Yeah, and there's so many lessons that you take from life that apply in the cockpit, and then vice versa. You learn so many things in the cockpit that make you a better business owner and a better whatever it is whatever role you have in life. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Carl. And what's next? What's next on the horizon? What are your goals for 2025 and beyond?
Boy, and this is the one I'm gonna say it, and I gotta finish my pilot interview course. I've said it. Okay, it's out there. I said by Sun and Fun, which is coming up in April, I'd finish my pilot interview course, have at least 100 questions and answers out there and I have it. It's just not open to the public. That's the big thing, because that's the one thing I can't do all the time. I get so many requests, and that's the one thing that would satisfy me as a person in aviation, is to help other people pass their interviews without being there. I can't do interview prep for everybody. So that's the next big thing. And the other thing in my professional life, so switching to the professional life, I've flown over the Atlantic Ocean, but not east-west. It's always north-south, going over Aruba, going down to South America and things like that, in the Caribbean. I think I want to go to Europe, so that's going to be my next journey, is heading over to Europe. It's a lot different. It's actually, from what I've heard, it's a lot easier, especially if you're an augmented crew. So that's the next journey in that realm. And one more thing, and if I say this to everybody, it might happen, is the one thing I love doing is actually putting cameras in the airplane and taking people on adventures like other people have done, and maybe teach them something. Because I did a video about how to get into the landing strip in Okeechobee, and people actually looked it up and said that helped them. And that right there resonated with me, if I could take people along. So that's the other thing. Once I get the airplane, I can go out and put some cameras on it and take people on a journey, on a flying journey. And there's all sorts of cool journeys out there that you can go on. So that's it. Those are the big ones.
Yeah, last time we talked, you said you were out on buying an airplane.
I was out of it.
Now you've got a purpose.
Absolutely.
That airplane.
Yes, that was the thing. Yes, I remember that conversation. It's like I have to have a purpose of owning an airplane. And and that's another thing we can talk about. Understand the mission of the airplane. I think that was the hardest thing, is I so wanted my wife to come fly with me. And finally she said to me, listen, get a plane that you want. I might go to one destination with you. You remember the last airplane I had, the 182? She went in that twice in the 7 years I had that. That's not much. I'm sorry, that was the 182. The one after that was the Cherokee. She never went in it. She just got a picture next to it. So then finally, it took a long time for that light bulb to go on. I need to get the airplane for myself. And that was my aha moment. And that's really, really what I'm doing now, is that journey as to what to get. I mean, I'd love to do just a whole episode. What airplane should I buy? That kind of thing. That'd be a lot of fun.
That sounds like a limiting belief. You had limiting beliefs that were holding you back from buying an airplane, Carl. But you've been working on those. And now
the belief was my wife was going to come with me, and she's not. She come in the jet. She'll go with me in the jet wherever we're going in the Airbus. But she's like, I'd rather have the air conditioning and she wants to have, the cocktail in the back and the air conditioning. That ain't happening in my 182,
Yeah, not worth the
risk. No, absolutely. But yeah, it's going to be an exciting journey. The next step, and knowing that there's many different ways to go and in that journey, and always be open to changing. You always have to realize, hey, what's the next step? What do we do now? And that's really important, is to understand that you can change. And I've had God knows how many airplanes I've been partners in and clubs and stuff like that. But it is really cool to be able to get into an airplane, have it for yourself, the freedom of flying. I can take the airplane and I don't have to come back on somebody else's schedule. And that's why I'd encourage people to check it out and talk to your mechanic. Your mechanic becomes really important. So make friends with a mechanic like James and say, hey, James, what kind of plane should I buy? And then I'll be sitting there for 3 hours talking to you about, your mission and what to do. We'll figure it out. I mean, a lot of times a mechanic will open your eyes to things, even a little thing. How about gear? I mean, how does that affect my maintenance? Little things like that. You can learn so much. But I'm excited about the next journey. That is the neatest thing. There's always something new coming down the pike in my life, and I'm actually really excited about 2025. Just so many new things happening, and I'm excited about seeing with your podcast where it goes. I think it's going to be terrific. I think it's great.
Yeah, thank you so much, honestly, for sharing. And what I hope through this is people listening obviously learn a little bit about the community and take little nuggets of what we talked about, but also learn more about you, Carl. Right? I wanted to learn your story more. That's why I asked you on this. You've given me little nuggets along the way, but I always wanted to hear sit down and have that conversation in the cockpit. Right? Dude,
Absolutely.
Just tell me your story. And I think hopefully this helps the listeners out there that are familiar with Carl's work, get a little bit more understanding of who he is and where he came from. And it's just we glazed over a lot. It's hard to pack it into 1 hour. We glossed right over it. But there's so much there that's really inspiring and awesome. So, Carl, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and I wish you the best in 2025. I'm definitely looking forward to contributing more and more with you and with Stuck Mike, and then any way I can help in aviation careers. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you got something from this, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, James.